participants, I am Dr. Ogah Moses of Sustainable Social Development, Cyprus Federal University of Agriculture, Bakodi. Day 1, I shall be taking you on social impact assessment. We're going to look at the course content, which has to do with introduction, definition and key terminologies, history and development and origins of SIA, potential uses and method for SIA, general principle, then challenges and limitation in SIA. By way of learning objectives, it is expected that at the end of this, you'll be able to explain the definition and terminology of social impact assessment, be able to explain the origins and purposes of SIA in promoting equitable and sustainable development, be able to describe SIA process as input to development planning, and also potential limitations and challenges. Be able to explain that. You see, our objectives are measurable. So when we say explain, we were able to measure to what extent we're able to explain. These are the learning outcome. It's expected that you as a participant be able to give us definition of SIA. You were able to acquire knowledge on origin and processes or purpose of SIA. Be able to describe SIA process and also the challenges and limitations that are associated with SIA. Now, introduction. What do you mean by social impact assessment? In so far as I've been saying SIA, because of the other things. We say it's the process that you obtain, analyze, that utilize socially relevant information to improve the overall effectiveness of planned development activities. In every development project, it is expected that social impact assessment should be carried out. For you to know the pros and the cons of such the development project. Every development project always comes with unintended consequences that in research that we don't plan for. So it is important that assessment, first of all, has to be carried out. It is expected that the participants, you familiarize yourself with potential value of SIA and the limitations of SIA in consideration of the particular needs and challenges of Nigeria development project. Now, what are the key concepts and definitions? We have to do with consultation and social engagement. In SIA, there should be consultation, there should be engagement, there should be baseline data, which may be quantitative or qualitative. You need information to describe and establish benchmark, to refresh for comparison for various social conditions existing at the time of the project initiation. Also, there should be cost-benefit analysis. In every project, you need to weigh the cost, you need to weigh the benefit. Here, we are going to compare and value aggregate potential costs and benefit for project operation. Also, talk of equitability, that is to what extent will existing social circumstances and planned development intervention promote fair inclusiveness and proportional access to socio-economic and political and other benefits that may accrue to it. We also talk of impact and risk. In SIA, certainly, risks become the impact factor here refers to consequences that are more certain to resolve from planned activities. Then risk, there are probability in nature. You cannot predict that this will happen. So you have to plan a way of mitigating those risks and uncertainty. Now, the origin of SIA in brief was that, after the post-World War II era, development emerged as a core concept for international cooperation. We have poor and disadvantaged countries that were badly affected because of the Second World War. So they need to be assisted to recover from war damages and trade imbalances, because they lack access to good healthcare, educational services, and other problems. That was why social impact assessment, came on board. Now, what is the general principle? We look at the research and consultation method, equitability, project benefit, project impact, sustainability, then SIA integrated planning. Now, what are we saying? The process and the step in SIA. We need to identify and consolidate the development project or activity. The first thing, or before you carry out the SIA assessment, is that what project is it that you have identified before you carry out the SIA assessment. Then you conduct initial site screening and then define the project footprint. Also, you formulate terms of reference, the scope of assessment, and the methods and the skills that are needed, for you to carry out the process. Now, what are the challenges and limitations? There may be lack of concessions on appropriate methods, unnecessary research skills. There may be lack of mandate, it may not be done if not required. Of course, before the development project must be deployed, it must be the general consensus of the public and then the stakeholder. There may be improper timing or lack of necessary resources, difficulty in achieving meaningful social engagement, and then difficulty in determining the SIA area of influence. Meaningful social engagement is always a challenge, and that is why in many development projects, when people are not carried on, there are people we call stakeholders. There bounds to be issues, problems, and the rest of them. This is a challenge too. You have difficulty in specifying clear objective. What is the value or validity of information obtained, from the project that's going to be carried out? They also have difficulty in formulating useful or meaningful recommendation with regard to social risk or issue that are not seen as significant. Of course, you may say that some risks you will want to overlook that this or doesn't matter, but at the end, there may be a serious problem and concern. The lesson tool of this SIA is what we call screening and scoping. And what is it in social impact assessment? We're going to look at what is screening process. We're going to look at the scoping tool. We have to determine the project area of influence. What is the project area of influence? Then we look at the steps in screening and scoping and the potential vulnerability. Now, it is important for us to know that at the end of it, you'll be able to explain the importance of screening and scoping for SIA effectiveness. You explain the importance of screening and scoping for SIA efficiency, the terminology regarding screening and scoping. Explain the project area of influence and then list potential limitations and challenges that are involved in screening and scoping. Now, the learning outcome, at the end of it, I'm sure you'll be able to explain the importance of screening and scoping in SIA. You'll be able to explain the project area of influence and then list potential limitations and challenges in screening and scoping. By way of definition, what is screening? So it casts a net broadly with the intention of identifying a wide range of possible risks. It's a way of you identifying the potential risks and the impact, whether it's positive or negative, that may be associated with the proposed development activity. Like I say from onset, every development project comes with unintended consequences, but overall, the interest is that you have positive influence on the life of the people, but at times there will be negative consequences. Therefore, you need to screen what might be those risks, the possible risks that may happen. Then we talk of scoping. By contrast, you say it's the winnowing. If you're a farmer, when you harvest rice from farm, what do? You winnow. You put them on the sun like this, and you do something like winnow to cast out sap so that you remain the real grains inside. It's the same thing here. What we do here, you have to filter those risks, determine which of these risks or this impact that been identified through screening, they are potentially significant. It may not be all the risks that may affect your project negatively. There are some that are of a higher capacity and that can influence your project. So you have to look at them in detail. Now, this screening and scoping, we consider them as the most important part of the SIA process because the increased likelihood that risk and impact will be identified and considered as to their potential significance. The likelihood that design alternative will be identified and considered as a means to avoid or minimize risk because they provide you the essential information for unforeseen circumstances so that you stay focused, so that you will know when you get there how you're going to address such challenges. Now, the initial process of exploring the overall project context, first of all, is to do screening. That is for you to identify all the potential social risks or impact within a defined area of influence. The area of influence here is the areas of the coverage of the project. Then after that, we talk of scoping, which is the initial screening result. Assess for potential significance in terms of the scale. To what extent is the severity of the risk that you've identified and duration, distributions among population groups. How sensitive those risks are. Then area of influence, we say the geographical boundaries for the SIA process. The area of influence includes the physical footprint area and the surrounding area for which risk and impact of populational significance, the coverage areas of this project. Then you talk of terms of reference, is the details, assignment details for overall assessment and reporting. It limits the scope and cost of inquiry and provide basis for shared understanding. Terms of reference provides you with directions, clear guidelines on the method and aspect of the SIA process, what you are going to do, screening process and information source. Initial information gathering, you start first of all with search for available documentation. Then you do proposal, concept notes, maps, photos, land records, area regional research, identification of potential risk and impact. Then initial identification and analysis of stakeholders, initial determination of area of influence. The screening process includes actual site visit for ground truth of available information. You need to get first-hand information of all the available data. The fundamental purpose of scoping is to establish the scope of work and method to be used in the assessment process. So you have to narrow the focus assessment to significant issue. You engage stakeholder, in the scoping stage. Because judgment of significance is professional. Some form of stakeholder engagement may be useful at this stage. Very, very important for you to analyze the stakeholder, people that will be involved, people that will be, affected by the project. Stakeholders can vary widely from those who will benefit from the proposed activity to those who may suffer significant losses. And you have to identify all of that, because that is why I said from the beginning that impact assessment is important, because people will be affected negatively. Some may suffer loss. So we have to take them into considerations. The potential threat, how do you determine the project area of influence? Critically important and frequently overlooked, social relevant usually extend beyond physical footprints of work, beyond scope of services or program operation. Social area of influence is not, the same with EIA, environmental impact assessment. Now, very important thing that we need to know here is screening, scoping, and vulnerability. The objective of both screening and scoping is to ensure that potential sources of vulnerability that may be associated with the proposed development activities are recognized and assessed. In every project, there are people that are most vulnerable, that most likely to be affected by the project negatively. Then you have to identify those people that will become vulnerable or more vulnerable as a direct result of the proposed activity. There are people that will be rendered landless, people that will be rendered jobless, people that will be rendered homeless as a result of land acquisition. So we need to identify all these people. You need to assess the potential source of vulnerability. What are the sources of this vulnerability? And the group or individual that might be affected, So you need to take that into consideration. Consider the vulnerable groups, their resilience or their capacity to adapt to changes induced by the project. It is not easy for somebody to be relocated to another area that he or she is not familiar with at all. What are your thoughts concerning the adaptability? Whether they're able to cope with the new environment, An explicit intervention test of reference for the main stage of SI process. We established agreement on the range of issues to be assessed and the method by which they will be assessed. In fact, when there is no clear terms of reference, the SI findings are more likely to lack focus or relevance. And that's why from the beginning it must be stated. If I'm to give you an assignment, I have to give you clear cut direction on what you're supposed to do and what not to do. This will serve as a guide. What are the challenges and limitations in screening and scoping? Number one, identify and recognizing the social context in which the proposed development activity will be situated is a major concern. And again, when there's a failure to identify an appropriate area of influence, the coverage area, the footprint, then there's a problem. And then when you apply judgment, determine which among potential numerous and wide-ranging social issues are considered significant for assessment purposes. And then you see that some are not significant. No, then there's a problem. In lesson 3, we are going to look at social welfare, social impact, and cost benefits analysis. Like I said before, in every project, there must be cost and there will be benefit. The overall picture of having a project is to have benefit attached to it. But you need to weigh the cost, the pros and the cons of it. What is that project bringing? And what is the cost involvement? Then challenges in cost benefit analysis. Then integrate social impact assessment and cost benefit analysis. It is expected that as I finish this section, you explain cost benefit analysis and development decision making with respect to SIA. You will be able to list challenges in cost benefit analysis. Then assessment of this. These ones are learning outcome. In economics, we believe that for a reliable objective means for ranking and choosing among investment possibility, there must be cost benefit analysis. If I have 3 or 4 projects that I want to embark upon, I have to weigh the cost of project 1 and the benefit, the cost and benefit of project 2. Then from there, I'll be able to choose which of these projects that will be more beneficial to me. There's what we call payback period in a project. If I'm to deploy a project, if I have project A, B, C, and D, what will be the number of years that I will be able to have my money, maybe 3 or 4 years in project A compared to B or C. Cost benefit analysis, we say it's a method for identifying and attaching a value to cost and to benefit, so that they can be compared in a manner that allows decision makers determine what is the best way to proceed. You weigh the cost. It's like somebody building a house. Then you have a contractor. Somebody will come with this quotation, the other one. So you weigh which one, will cost less, but we'll be able to deliver on your expectation. We say it's applied to all aspects of a proposed development activity. All costs, whether finance, construction, administrative, operating, environmental, and others, are all potential benefit that have to be taken into consideration. It has processes. Number one, we have to identify all costs and benefits associated with a proposed activity without leaving anything, undone. Weigh out all the costs, weigh out all the benefits that will accrue to that project. Number two, establish a share metric for valuation in monetary currency or monetary value of all costs and benefit. Attach cost, attach benefit, then use a net present value after deducting all the costs. What are you going to gain at the end of it all? So you have to take that into consideration. Talk of net benefit, aggregate measure frequently, overlook distributional implication, and favor efficiency over equity. Then you value. Then we talk of time valuation and net present value issues. It's challenged today with our current time valuations of money. Even the projects today that may cost, let's say 10 million naira tomorrow, the value might not be the same again because of a time valuation. So those things you have to take them into consideration. We look at the integrating SIA and cost benefit analysis. Social impact assessment can improve cost benefit analysis and overall development decision making through you identifying and valuing costs and benefit through stakeholders engagement. Especially in a development project in an area that you are not familiar with, stakeholders engagement is important. They know the cost of materials, whether it is that's going to be used over there. Then you conduct more deliberate and thorough distribution analysis, making arrangements for avoiding or mitigating harm. They emphasize support for vulnerable or disadvantaged group. Very important. Then you engage stakeholder in promoting, or making arrangement for avoiding or mitigating harm, emphasizing support for vulnerable or disadvantaged group. Engaging with stakeholders, promoting, and then deliberation on a consensus. Now, we look at another important topic addressing vulnerability and disadvantage in social impact assessment. So what is vulnerability? We say it's an internal risk factor of the subject or system that is exposed to a hazard and corresponds to its intrinsic predispositions to be affected or to be susceptible to damage. You know, the word we say it represents physical, economic, political, or social susceptibility, of a community to damage in the case of destabilizing phenomena of natural or anthropogenic origin. We know in most cases that the most vulnerable groups that we talk about are the aged, the women, and the children. But do you know too that a community, politically or economically, can be vulnerable, can be susceptible to all these issues? We have sources to include poverty, lack of resources, pattern of social or political exclusion, limited rights, and lack of social influence or voice. People that don't have voice, people that do not have social influence, people with limited rights are also vulnerable. This one is not the case of only the aged, the women, and the children. The combined result of these sources of vulnerability is a simultaneous increase in exposure. When you are vulnerable, you are exposed to risk. You are exposed to hazard. You are exposed to factors, in fact, that may degrade your life. The impact and decrease in resilience or capacity for adaptation. As so long as you are vulnerable, your capacity to adapt to certain conditions at a point seems to reduce. Look at it economically. People in a society today, some of them are vulnerable because of the policies of the government. And this one is not a matter of you being a man or a woman. As what is most broadly, the term refers to heightened exposure. This is the clear broad definition of the heightened exposure to risk or insecurity, coupled with diminished resilience or capacities for adaptation. When you are vulnerable, your capacity to adapt reduces. The sources may vary widely, relatively disadvantaged because of physical or mental disability. So people are vulnerable because of their identity, because of political or cultural affiliation, because of race, because of ethnicity, even religion, language, or other political or cultural factors may make one to be vulnerable, depending on the angle that you look at it. Some may face severe poverty or lack of access to essential natural resources. In our world today, the people that we see that are most vulnerable are people that are poor. It is much more than that. Even in terms of religions, in terms of race, in terms of tribe, in terms of region, all this, one can be vulnerable. In terms of material well-being, even vulnerability often reflects to a lack of property. Even in material well-being, somebody can be vulnerable. Or you having a recognized property right, lack of adaptable skill, or lack of access to markets, services, or facility. This was also contributed. Another concept relating to vulnerability is equity. Here, we mean relationship between equality in terms of outcome and the fairness in the distribution of rights and opportunities in the world today. All men are born equal. It is expected that equity, fairness, and justice should play out in our society today. But if I might ask, is it like that today? An equitable society limits inequality. It provides means to all groups, irrespective of whom you are, irrespective of your race, irrespective of your political affiliation, irrespective of where you come from. All of us are supposed to have the same right in our society today. Then we have inclusion and exclusion. Social inclusiveness is essential to social equality. Social impact assessment, it involves identifying social biases, legal barriers, or other form of exclusion from development-related benefit or from opportunity to participate in development-related processes. Now, another concept that has to do with vulnerability is resilience and adaptation. We say resilience refers to factors, whether savings, reserve, relationship that increase the ability of people to endure. You remain resolute, you remain under control, even under serious circumstances, under adverse changes. You stay calm to be able to recover from them. Adaptation here is the ability of you now to make changes in your own living patterns. Like the challenge we find ourselves in our country today, many people have adapted, but you get to a point that at least you no longer, want to adapt. Life has taught us that any situations that we find ourselves, what we do, we have to adapt and keep going. Premised on the subsidy removal, we know that many people that used to drive car today, they have adapted to use a motorbike. Some have adapted to commercial, vehicles like this, and then they leave their cars at home. Generally, vulnerability reflects diminished resilience or capacity for adaptation. Now, also, what are the forms of vulnerability? The one that we most know that people always talk about is disability. Disability here, people living with disability as a result of blindness, deafness, stunted growth, morbid obesity, malnutrition, all that, even mental retardation, dementia, all these ones are also forms of a disability. Then you have ascriptive. This one has to do with race, with ethnicity, with age, with gender, are determined at birth. They are sources of vulnerability in some social settings. Also language and religion. The more subject to changes in usage often remain as an assign at birth and also may lead to vulnerability. These ones are God ordained. Your language, your religion, of course, it may be as a result of a social setting, but your language is already ordained by God, where you belong, your sex, is already your ethnicity and race. But you see, some people see this as what? As a disadvantage factors for others. And that is why there's problem today in the world. Then you have also social and social discrimination and exclusion. It be attached to factors that we talked about, also sexual orientation, on gender identity, on the basis of political affiliation, on the marital status, on educational level, and other considerations today. They all form of vulnerability in our society today, that people take them as source. It's all known to be. Why should I be on the disadvantaged side? Because of my political affiliation, because of my gender identity, because of my marital status. That shouldn't be. We also talk of another source, which is also economic. Economic factor here refers to lack of wealth, lack of income, access to resources. Of course, today in our society, it's people that are rich that have the power. They can determine anything that happens in a society today. And then others that have the property right, they have the right, over others, especially political power. Then you have environmental issues, exposure to resource degradation, we increase scarcity, natural disasters. We make, want to be vulnerable. Like it happens in the world today. You talk of flood, you talk of wildfires, and all this. We subject one to, all these factors. With regard to vulnerability, the purpose of the social impact assessment process, number one, to identify, to assess, and propose measures to manage or otherwise mitigate them. These sources of vulnerability. That is the essence of SIA. Identify the source of vulnerability. Assess, then what are the measures to manage them? What are the measures? Very, very important. That was associated with the proposed development project. And so that is why we talk of SIA first of all in a development project. When all these ones are done, you look at the way to assess. And then when you have identified them, how do you mitigate against them? Focusing upon vulnerability may require adjustment to methods and approaches employed at each step in the process. Vulnerability and the SIA process, you have to obtain and understand view and perception regarding sources of vulnerability. What are the sources? What are the people's perceptions about it? If you request on you extensive effort and then suggestions and then measures that you mitigate the effect of vulnerability, you have to consider who is involved and who is affected. At the initial screening stage, identification of potential sources of vulnerability require a broad-based review of the proposed development project. It also requires at least preliminary communication with people that will be affected, the community, to ensure that the vulnerability as they perceive them are also identified. Very, very important. And it has to do in SIA process. First of all, identify these people that may be seen as being vulnerable. Identify them, assess, and then work out measure so that you'll be able to mitigate adversity. Why should one be vulnerable on the basis of the language that they speak, on the basis of race, on the basis of religion, on the basis of where he or she comes from? That shouldn't be. So it's important that in every development process that SIA should be carried out so that you weigh the risks that may come, so that you weigh the impact of this project. Overall, the intention is to have the positive impact on the life of the people. Thank you so very much. This is a question for discussion that you have to, say something, make your comments here. We are to discuss 5 common sources of vulnerability, as I enumerated. So it's important. Thanks so very much. Thanks for your apt attention, appreciations. Thank you, and thank you so very much.